Imagine an ancient city in the final darkness before sunrise. The streets are quiet, the market gates remain closed, and a thin blue light begins to form above the eastern horizon. A merchant is arranging jars beside his stall. A farmer stands near the edge of the fields, waiting for enough light to work. A priest watches the sky from a temple courtyard. On a distant wall, a guard listens for the signal that will end his watch. None of them owns a wristwatch. No clock hangs above a doorway. No alarm is about to ring, and no glowing screen will announce that it is 5:47 in the morning. Yet the city is not without order. People still know when to wake, when to open the gates, when to gather for prayer, when to begin trade, and when to return home before darkness. Long before mechanical clocks, watches, and smartphones, human beings learned to read time in the world around them. They watched the sun climb across the sky, measured the changing length of shadows, followed the moon and stars, listened for bells and horns, and observed the steady movement of water, sand, oil, wax, and incense. Time was not always a number. It was light touching a wall, a star rising above the horizon, a flame reaching a marked line, or a public signal echoing across the rooftops. Modern life depends on exact minutes and seconds. Trains depart at fixed times, factories measure shifts, schools follow schedules, and a delay of 5 minutes can change an entire day. The people of the distant past lived differently. Their world did not move according to a single universal clock. Time was local, flexible, seasonal, and closely connected to nature. To understand how they organized daily life, we must first step back into an age when hours were not always equal. Minutes had little meaning, and the sky was humanity's most reliable timekeeper. Early communities did not initially need precise measurement. A hunter needed to know whether enough daylight remained to return safely, not whether it was exactly 3:18 in the afternoon. A farmer began work when the ground was visible and stopped when the fading light made labor difficult. Meals were prepared when tasks paused, hunger appeared, or the position of the sun suggested the middle or end of the day. People spoke of dawn, morning, midday, afternoon, sunset, evening, and deep night. These broad periods were enough for small settlements where most activity followed the natural rhythm of light and darkness. Longer cycles were also understood through repeated changes. The rising and setting of the sun marked a day. The phases of the moon helped divide longer stretches of time. Seasonal rain, heat, frost, and wind guided planting, harvesting, hunting, and migration. The arrival of certain birds or the flowering of particular plants could signal the approach of a season. The appearance of a familiar star before sunrise might announce that floods, cold weather, or agricultural work would soon begin. Time was not separated from events. It was known through them. A meeting might be arranged for sunrise, when the shadow reached a doorway, after the evening meal, or when a particular star appeared. As communities grew larger, however, rough estimates became less effective. Temples had rituals to perform. Markets had to open and close. Armies needed guard rotations. Courts had to limit speeches and organize hearings. Large groups of workers had to begin and end tasks together. The expanding needs of civilization demanded better methods. And the first great instrument was already visible to everyone, the sun. From the earliest periods, observers noticed that the sun followed a dependable path. It appeared in the east, climbed higher during the morning, reached its greatest height near the middle of the day, and descended toward the west. Even without numbers, its position offered a useful guide. When the sun was low and the air remained cool, morning had only begun. When it stood high above the landscape, the day had reached its central point. When it dropped toward the horizon and shadows stretched across the ground, evening was approaching. Skilled farmers, travelers, shepherds, and sailors became remarkably good at estimating how much daylight remained. A person could glance at the sky and decide whether there was time to continue working, reach the next village, cross a river, or find shelter. Shadows made this judgment even clearer. In the morning, every object cast a long shadow toward the west. As the sun rose, those shadows shortened. Near midday, they reached their smallest length, then slowly extended in the opposite direction during the afternoon. A farmer standing in a field could watch the shadow of a tree move across the soil. A traveler could compare the sun with a hill or building. Even the human body became a simple measuring tool. Someone could judge the remaining daylight by the angle of a shadow or by holding a hand toward the horizon and counting the space between the sun and the land. Such estimates were not exact, but they were often sufficient. Their weakness became obvious whenever the sky changed. Clouds could hide the sun. Mountains, walls, smoke, and forests blocked the horizon. The sun's path also shifted with the seasons, so the same position did not represent precisely the same moment throughout the year. Summer days were long, winter days short, and the angle of sunlight changed with location. Human beings therefore began to create fixed markers that turned the moving shadow into a more organized system. One of the simplest was the gnomon, an upright stick, stone, pillar, or pole placed in an open space. As sunlight struck it, the shadow moved across the ground. By observing where that shadow fell at different stages of the day, people could mark important positions. The shortest shadow indicated the region of midday. Other marks separated the morning from the afternoon or divided daylight into smaller portions. The principle was extraordinarily simple, yet it transformed a natural phenomenon into an instrument. A community could return to the same marker day after day and compare the shadow with known points. Building a useful shadow clock required patience. The pole had to stand upright. The ground needed to be reasonably level. Observers had to record the shadow repeatedly and account for seasonal changes. Early versions may have identified only a few broad divisions, but later systems became more sophisticated. Large stones, pillars, and obelisks served a similar purpose. Their shadows could be seen from a distance and used by many people at once. In ancient Egypt, tall structures and carefully placed markers helped observers follow the sun's movement. A worker or official watching the shadow of a monument could recognize the approach of midday or the passing of an appointed period. The gnomon also helped reveal longer cycles. By tracking the noon shadow through the year, astronomers could see it grow and shrink with the seasons. This observation connected daily timekeeping with the calendar and the changing position of the sun. From these simple markers developed the sundial, one of the most recognizable devices of the ancient world. A sundial used a fixed pointer to cast a shadow across a surface marked with divisions. As the sun moved, the shadow crossed those lines and indicated the stage of the day. Designs varied widely. Some were flat and horizontal. Others were mounted vertically on walls. Certain examples used curved or bowl-shaped surfaces that followed the path of the shadow more accurately. Portable versions allowed travelers, officials, or soldiers to carry a small instrument, though it still had to be positioned correctly. Civilizations in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, India, China, and elsewhere developed shadow-based instruments adapted to local needs and knowledge. A well-made sundial was not simply a decorated stone with lines. Its pointer had to be aligned with the movement of the sky, and its markings depended on geographical location. A device designed for one latitude might give misleading readings when carried far away. Seasonal changes also complicated matters. Many ancient societies divided daylight into 12 parts and darkness into another 12. Because summer daylight lasted longer than winter daylight, the daytime hours changed in length. A summer hour could be much longer than a winter hour, even though both were called an hour. The system seems strange from a modern perspective, but it matched the natural day. Work expanded with summer light and contracted during winter. Time bent with the seasons rather than remaining fixed. In a Roman forum, a citizen might glance toward a public sundial before a legal hearing or business meeting. A servant could be sent to check the shadow. Wealthy households sometimes maintained private devices, while ordinary residents depended on public markers or rough observation. Complaints about inaccurate sundials reveal how much people relied on them, but no sundial could solve the greatest problem. It was useless at night and unreliable under clouds. To measure time in darkness, indoors, or during bad weather, societies turned to flowing water. The water clock, often known by the Greek name clepsydra, measured time through the controlled movement of water from one vessel to another. In its simplest form, a container had a small opening near the bottom. Water slowly escaped, and marks inside showed how much time had passed. Another design allowed water to drip into a receiving vessel, raising the level toward a series of lines. Unlike a sundial, this instrument did not require direct sunlight. It could operate inside a temple, courtroom, palace, or observatory. Water clocks appeared in several ancient civilizations and served many purposes. Priests used them to organize rituals. Astronomers measured intervals while observing stars. Soldiers relied on them for guard changes. Officials could regulate meetings, and courts could limit the length of speeches. In ancient Greece, a speaker might be allowed to continue only while water remained in a vessel. When the final drops escaped, the allotted period ended. The device gave physical form to an invisible interval. Words consumed time just as surely as the water disappeared. Yet the water clock was difficult to perfect. As the level in an outflow vessel dropped, pressure changed and the stream could slow. A tiny opening might become blocked by dirt. Cold weather could thicken or freeze the water, while heat increased evaporation. Containers had to be refilled, cleaned, and checked. Engineers gradually improved their designs through carefully shaped vessels, regulated flow, floats, gears, and indicators. Some elaborate clocks used rising water to move figures, ring bells, or display astronomical information. These machines demonstrated that time could be measured without looking directly at the sky, but they still depended on maintenance and skilled construction. Night presented its own challenge. Without the sun, people turned their attention to the stars. Experienced observers knew that the heavens appeared to rotate in a regular pattern. Constellations rose in the east, crossed the sky, and disappeared in the west. Certain stars reached particular positions at predictable stages of darkness. In ancient Egypt, groups of stars known as decans were used to divide the night. Priests and astronomers watched their rising points and recorded their movements. By noting which group had appeared above the horizon, they could estimate how far the night had advanced. This demanded an open sky, careful training, and years of observation. Clouds made the system useless, and the visible pattern changed through the seasons. The moon provided broader guidance, but was less reliable for measuring short intervals because its position and phase changed from night to night. Military communities often used watches rather than exact hours. Darkness was divided into several periods, and guards served one watch before being replaced. A central timekeeper, officer, star observer, water clock, or signal controlled the rotation. The individual soldier did not need to know the exact time. He only needed to remain alert until the appointed sign. Imagine a guard standing on a city wall while the settlement sleeps below. The air is cold, torches flicker, and every sound seems louder in the darkness. He studies a familiar star moving above a tower and waits for the distant horn that will release him. His sense of time comes from the sky, physical fatigue, and expectation. Animal behavior also offered rough signals. Roosters commonly called before dawn, dogs reacted to movement, and birds began to stir as light approached. Such signs were useful, but never perfectly dependable. A rooster could call early, weather could alter behavior, and noise could wake an animal at the wrong moment. More reliable schedules required trained observers and instruments, which made temples and religious institutions central to the development of timekeeping. Sacred ceremonies often had to occur at particular moments: sunrise, midday, sunset, moonrise, or a specified point during the night. Priests watched celestial cycles because ritual timing was believed to preserve order between human society, rulers, nature, and the divine. Temples became centers of astronomical record-keeping. Observers tracked the sun, moon, planets, and stars across years or generations. Their knowledge supported calendars, festivals, agriculture, and political authority. A ruler who could announce the proper season for planting or the correct date of a ceremony appeared connected to cosmic order. In later Christian monasteries, the day and night were divided by canonical hours of prayer. Monks gathered at appointed periods, including times when most of the surrounding population slept. Sundials, water clocks, candles, stars, and eventually mechanical devices helped maintain the schedule. Bells called the community together. Their sound reached beyond the monastery walls, giving nearby residents a shared sense of the day. This reveals an important difference between ancient and modern time. Today, each person carries a private clock. In earlier societies, time was often public. It belonged to the temple, church, palace, city gate, military post, or official timekeeper. Most people did not check a personal device. They listened. Bells, horns, drums, gongs, trumpets, and shouted announcements turned measured intervals into signals that entire communities could understand. A horn might announce the opening of the gates. A drum could call soldiers to formation. A bell told merchants to begin or end trade. Another warned of fire, invasion, or storm. Evening signals instructed families to return home and extinguish or cover dangerous flames. In medieval towns, the curfew bell marked the time when fires were to be covered and streets gradually cleared. The word itself became associated with restrictions on movement, but its original function was closely tied to household safety and public order. One sound could coordinate hundreds or thousands of people without requiring them to see a clock. Picture a town at the end of the working day. The sun has dropped behind the roofs, shadows fill the narrow streets, and a bell begins to ring from a tower. Merchants pull cloth over their goods, craftsmen set down their tools, guards prepare to close the gates, families light lamps and gather indoors. No one asks whether it is 7 or 7:05. The bell has defined the moment. Inside homes, workshops, courts, and religious buildings, burning materials provided another way to measure intervals. Candle clocks relied on the relatively steady consumption of wax. A candle of consistent thickness could be marked with lines. As the flame moved downward, each mark showed that another period had passed. Some designs placed small nails or metal balls into the wax. When the candle burned to a particular level, the object fell onto a metal plate and produced a sound, creating a simple alarm. This was useful for scholars, monks, guards, or anyone who needed a signal during the night. Oil lamps could be marked in a similar way. As the fuel level dropped, the remaining oil indicated approximately how long the lamp had burned. These devices were convenient because they provided light and measured time at once, but their accuracy varied. Different wax mixtures burned at different rates. Wick thickness mattered. A draft made the flame larger or smaller. Temperature softened or hardened the wax. An unattended candle could go out or cause a fire. Oil could burn unevenly and a lamp might leak. Such instruments measured approximate intervals rather than universal time. A scholar writing late into the night might glance at the flame approaching the next line and know that another portion of his work period had nearly ended. The room would smell of smoke and warm wax, while shadows trembled across the walls. In parts of East Asia, incense clocks transformed burning time into an especially refined art. A stick, spiral, or carefully shaped trail of incense burned at a predictable rate. Different lengths represented different intervals. Some clocks included threads stretched across the path, each holding a small metal ball. When the burning incense reached a thread, it broke, releasing the ball onto a tray with a clear sound. Other designs used changing fragrances. As the fire moved from one section to another, a new scent entered the room, allowing people to recognize the passage of time without watching the clock. Incense worked indoors, did not freeze like water, and could burn quietly for long periods. It also fit naturally within religious and ceremonial environments. A maze-shaped incense seal might glow slowly across a decorative tray, while smoke curled upward in delicate lines. The room changed not only in sight, but in scent. Even this elegant method depended on conditions. Humidity, air movement, the quality of the incense, and uneven packing altered the rate. Precision remained limited, but the instrument shows how creatively societies transformed ordinary materials into measures of duration. The hourglass offered a different solution. Fine material passed through a narrow opening between two glass chambers. When the upper chamber emptied, a fixed interval had ended. Although devices using falling material may have earlier origins, the hourglass became especially useful in the medieval period as glassmaking improved. It operated indoors, at night, under clouds, and even aboard ships. It did not display the hour of the day. Instead, it answered a more limited question. How long has this activity lasted? Sailors used small sandglasses to organize watches, measure speed in combination with other tools, and regulate duties. Cooks, craftsmen, priests, and teachers could use similar instruments. The material inside was not always ordinary beach sand. Finely processed sand, powdered stone, ground eggshell, or other dry substances produced a more consistent flow. Moisture remained an enemy because damp grains clumped together and blocked the neck. Once the lower chamber filled, someone had to turn the glass over. On a ship, a sailor watched the final grains fall, rotated the instrument, and rang a bell to mark another portion of the watch. The sound traveled over the deck while waves moved beneath the hull. Here, timekeeping depended not only on the object, but on human attention. A neglected hourglass stopped being useful the moment no one turned it. Despite all these inventions, the majority of ordinary people still lived without precise schedules. Farmers, laborers, herders, and villagers organized their days around tasks, weather, and light. Work began when conditions allowed. Meals came at natural pauses. Travel ended before dangerous darkness. Markets followed local signals. Sleep usually began after sunset, though household work, conversation, religious activity, and seasonal labor could continue by firelight. A person might promise to arrive after sunrise, near midday, before the evening bell, or when the moon rose. Punctuality meant something different in such a world. Arriving within the same broad portion of the day might be entirely acceptable. Roads were slow, weather was unpredictable, and no shared system guaranteed that two distant communities agreed on the same hour. Even towns close together could follow slightly different local time because noon was determined by the sun's highest point in each place. Time belonged to the landscape. The gradual arrival of mechanical clocks began to change that relationship. In medieval Europe, large weight-driven mechanisms appeared in towers, monasteries, churches, and civic buildings. Early examples used gears and regulating devices to divide motion into repeated intervals. They were expensive, complex, and often inaccurate by modern standards. Many did not initially display a face. Their most important function was to strike a bell. The town heard the hours before it clearly saw them. Mechanical clocks could operate without sunlight and did not depend on a steady water supply, though they required winding, repair, and adjustment. Their bells gave communities a more regular public rhythm. Work, prayer, trade, and civic life gradually became tied to mechanically measured hours. Clock faces became more common. Smaller household clocks appeared. Spring-driven mechanisms allowed greater portability, and watches eventually placed time in the hands or pockets of individuals. At first, owning such a device was a sign of wealth and status. Accuracy remained limited, and people still corrected clocks using sundials or astronomical observation. Minute hands became useful only when mechanisms improved enough to make smaller divisions meaningful. For centuries, old and new methods existed together. A town might possess a tower clock, while farmers still judged daylight from shadows. Sailors continued using sandglasses. Households burned marked candles. Monasteries listened to bells. Sundials remained valuable for setting mechanical clocks. The transformation accelerated with factories, railways, navigation, science, and long-distance communication. A factory demanded workers at the same moment. A railway schedule could not function if every town followed a different local noon. Telegraph networks connected distant places so quickly that conflicting times became a practical problem. Standardized time zones eventually replaced much of the older local system. Time became uniform, portable, and increasingly precise. The second, once irrelevant to ordinary life, gained importance. Mechanical clocks disciplined cities, coordinated transport, and reshaped work. Eventually, electronic and atomic systems measured intervals with a precision ancient observers could never have imagined. Yet the roots of that achievement remain visible in the oldest methods. Every clock still performs the same basic act. It follows a regular change and uses that change to divide experience. The movement may come from the sun, flowing water, falling sand, a swinging pendulum, a vibrating crystal, or the behavior of atoms, but the principle is continuous. Humanity learned to turn repetition into measurement. The distinction between measuring a day and organizing a calendar also mattered. A community might have no instrument capable of identifying a precise hour, yet possess a highly developed understanding of months, seasons, and ceremonial dates. Calendars emerged from long observation of the sun, moon, and stars. Lunar months helped people anticipate tides, festivals, and recurring religious obligations, while solar observations revealed solstices, equinoxes, and the turning points of the agricultural year. Stone alignments, temple orientations, horizon markers, and carefully chosen observation points could identify the sunrise or sunset associated with a particular season. Such knowledge did not tell a farmer that it was 10 minutes past noon, but it could tell an entire society when to prepare fields, expect floods, move herds, or gather for a sacred celebration. In this sense, the earliest masters of time were not clockmakers, but patient observers who compared one year with the next and learned to recognize slow patterns hidden within the sky. Their records also revealed that natural cycles did not always fit neatly together. A certain number of lunar months did not perfectly match the solar year, so calendars required adjustments. Extra days or months were sometimes inserted to keep festivals and farming seasons from drifting too far from their proper place. Controlling those adjustments gave priests and rulers considerable authority because the official calendar influenced taxes, ceremonies, contracts, and public expectations. Timekeeping was therefore never merely technical. It was also social and political. The power to announce the season, open the market, call a court into session, or ring the evening bell was the power to shape the behavior of others. Public time signals created shared order, but they also revealed hierarchy. A laborer responded to the bell. An official decided when it would sound. A soldier served the watch. A commander arranged the rotation. A worshiper arrived for a ritual. Trained observers had already determined the moment. Even when the instrument was simple, the system around it could be complex. People had to agree that a particular shadow, sound, or ritual represented a binding moment. Without that agreement, a sundial was only a stone, and a bell was only noise. Daily time also felt different because artificial lighting was limited and costly. Fire, oil, candles, and lamps extended activity beyond sunset, but they required fuel and constant care. Many households allowed darkness to shape sleep more strongly than it does today. Winter nights could bring longer periods indoors, while summer light supported extended work. Yet the idea that everyone simply slept from sunset until sunrise would be misleading. Guards remained awake, bakers prepared ovens before dawn, sailors worked through rotating watches, caregivers attended the sick, priests performed night rituals, and craftspeople sometimes continued by lamplight. The need to wake at an unusual hour encouraged ingenious alarms. A water vessel could be arranged to tip or ring when it reached a certain level. A marked candle might release a metal object. A servant, guard, or member of a religious community could be assigned to wake others. These arrangements remind us that timekeeping was often a human service before it became a household object. Someone watched the stars, tended the water clock, turned the hourglass, maintained the flame, or sounded the signal. Accuracy depended on responsibility. If the watcher fell asleep, the schedule failed. If the water froze, the interval stretched. If the candle burned unevenly, the alarm came early or late. Modern clocks hide that labor inside mechanisms and electronic circuits, but older systems made the human role visible. They also encouraged a different relationship with uncertainty. People expected weather, distance, and imperfect instruments to alter plans. They used time as a guide rather than an absolute command. The later spread of mechanical clocks did more than improve measurement. It gradually changed expectations. Hours became less dependent on daylight. Schedules became more rigid, and lateness could be judged against a public standard rather than a broad natural period. What had once been read from the environment was increasingly announced by machines. This transition was slow, uneven, and never complete, but it marked one of the most profound changes in everyday life. Return now to the ancient city where our story began. The eastern sky has brightened. The first sunlight touches the upper walls. A priest recognizes the moment for a ritual. A farmer sees his shadow stretching behind him and walks into the field. A merchant hears the gate signal and opens his stall. A guard watches a new figure climb the steps to replace him. None carries a clock, yet the city awakens in order. Its people know time through light, movement, sound, memory, and shared custom. Before mechanical clocks, societies measured the day with the sun and its shadows. They used sundials to divide daylight, water clocks to count intervals indoors or at night, stars to follow the passage of darkness, and the moon to guide longer cycles. They listened to bells, horns, drums, and public calls. They watched candles, oil lamps, incense, and falling sand. They followed animal behavior, seasonal change, religious schedules, and the rhythm of work itself. These methods were less precise than modern timekeeping, but precision was not always necessary. Each instrument answered a practical need. A sundial told a citizen when the day had advanced. A water clock limited a speech. A star ended a guard's watch. A bell closed the market. A candle woke a scholar. An hourglass organized life at sea. Together they allowed civilizations to build, trade, worship, travel, govern, and survive. Modern clocks tell us the exact second, but the people of the past read time in the sky above them and the world around them. They saw it lengthen across the ground as a shadow, heard it strike from a tower, watched it drip from a vessel, smelled it change in a trail of incense, and felt it pass with the cooling of the evening air. Before humanity placed time inside a machine, time surrounded everyone. It was written in sunlight, carried by water, traced among the stars, and repeated in every dawn.